Hello, and today I am wanting to talk about something that is kind of spurred by a YouTube comment. Not on my channel. I don't really get any comments yet. I haven't really built a viewership, but I continue plugging on. And so this was from I think reporting from Ukraine. I had mentioned how much I appreciate his approach to coverage of the war, of the military situation. Every day he has this little story about something that happened on the front or something like that. Kind of a deep analysis into something that is kind of significant that he thinks is significant that's happening is initiated by the Ukrainian military. Now, obviously, this is a one-sided kind of approach, but you know, I'm not a military blogger, right? At least I don't consider myself one. I'm a pro-democracy blogger. That's how I decided to frame this. And right now, the biggest battle for democracy, there's two of them. One is here in the U.S., and one is over in Ukraine. And both of them, in my view, are linked as the root cause of Russian interference. And so, but it is very important. It is very important that Ukraine fights over every field, fights over every tree line. It's very important. I think it was, I believe in his hour-long interview before he went off and did his not a coup in Moscow and stopped outside of Moscow. Prigozhin, in an interview, he talked about how Russia is leaving the bodies of its youth in all around the Ukrainian steppes. In his view, it was not worth the cost. It was not, what was happening was not worth the cost, especially since, in his view, it's all built on greed, rather than any kind of a sense of we have to do this. It's in self-defense. It is all about greed. And so Russia is destroying itself. They're destroying themselves by constantly doing what they're doing. They have one tactic, and that tactic is going to get, a field here or there every day. And in the meantime, they're going to lose 1,000 troops doing it. They're going to lose artillery doing it. They're going to lose a couple tanks doing it. Some days it's 3 tanks, some days it's 20 tanks, depending on what exactly was attempted, what was hit. The question is, are the gains worth the losses? And the fact is that they're not. So while I'm operating on 2 levels here. On one of them, on an emotional human level, it is absolutely horrific what is happening in Ukraine. Absolutely horrific what Russia continues to do. And the sacrifices that the Ukrainians make in order to slow them down is tremendous. And they do a fantastic job. I have a very limited amount of time. I am very well aware of what's going on there. And I'm very well aware of the fact that, the Russians continue gaining ground here and there, filling in little gaps right now. As far as I could tell, in the last couple of weeks, they have made no progress toward Provost itself. Just kind of south of Provost, they've been kind of doing some things. There's like, oh my goodness, there's a very small cauldron with encompassing several fields that have Ukrainian military in a low-lying field, and will they be able to retreat in time? Well, the answer is yes, they will if they're given the orders to do so, and hopefully they will all evacuate at the last minute, and because everybody there knows what the situation is. The sky is constantly patrolled by drones from both sides, so it's not like nobody there knows what's going on, and they know the importance of conserving every soldier. But you know what? It's a small patch of low-lying fields. Its only significance is how many Russians that the commanders there decide to sacrifice in order to take it. You know, it has no significance beyond that. So I'm not really concerned about they're slowly eating away at this cauldron. That's expected. That's how this war is being fought. That's how the defense is being fought. And but the real question is how is Russia going to be able to continue to do this? I saw that they were bragging about having made 140,000 drones domestically last year, and oh yeah, Ukraine's done had built over 1 million drones themselves during that same time period. But Russia is going to increase their drone production 10 times next year. I don't believe that. And I don't believe it for a very simple reason. They don't have the manpower to do this anymore. China's cut them off. They can't get goods from China because China won't accept their money. They could barter, but all they had to barter with are raw materials because Russia doesn't make stuff themselves, really. They've been, when they do deals with other countries for we'll supply you with T-72 tanks, typically they're not actually supplying the tanks themselves. Instead, they're basically licensing the production of it to another country, such as India, to make there, so that Russia doesn't have to do that. I think there's a Constantine on Inside Russia who has spoken repeatedly about how Russia doesn't make stuff. They produce stuff. They produce raw materials. They'll produce and export a tremendous amount of oil, but they won't export oil products, just the raw oil, because it's harder to make the stuff with the oil than it is to extract the oil, and that's what they're looking for, is the easy, quick bucks. Same thing with steel and stuff. They sell the ore to China in exchange for finished goods. Problem is that you can't ship a train full of oil or iron ore to a Chinese factory that's producing finished goods and say, hey, I'll trade you this stuff for those products. I mean, they're not going to have you shipped them to a production plant. You didn't ship them to like a refinery or a foundry. They're no good at the factory, and the factory is probably owned by a different person than who owns the refinery the oil has to go to, or whatever. You can't barter effectively in that way. It works if I have 2 apples and you have a fish. Here, they're food. They're easily portable. and it's just very small scale. If you were to offer me, like, here's a pallet full of apples in exchange for a fish, and I don't have the ability to do anything with the apples except eat them myself, or have my family eat them, they're going to go bad before I don't get the value from it. And that's what Russia's having to try to rely on, and it's not working because it makes no sense. You can't do this at scale. Just like you can't, as I said yesterday, you can't rely on cryptocurrency by scale, or for scale like Russia needs. But their innovators are gone. Those they're sitting over there in places like Uzbekistan and Armenia. Places where they could get the heck out of Russia during the first mobilization. And I get it. Most of them probably did not. Well, okay, I don't know. I shouldn't say this because the innovators and the highly educated people probably have a different viewpoint of Russia and its place in the world than most Russians do. So I'm not going to make that assumption. Constantine from Inside Russia probably has a lot more insight into that than I do because he's Russian and living in exile in Uzbekistan. He's an economist. But where are they getting the work? Where are they going to get the workers for these drones? Where are they going to get the workers to make these things? They probably have a factory all picked out that probably was making consumer goods last year and is being switched over to drone production somehow. You gotta have the microchips. I don't know what scale microchips Russia is capable of producing. Last I heard, they did have some chip fabs that possibly were able to make like 1990s, maybe 2000 era chips. So like they'd be, running at the equivalent of that kind of electronics, which isn't going to give you like support for AI or modern video graphics kind of stuff, but would be functional for a lot of purposes. I mean, most of the stuff that we use today are in electronics. These are old chips, these are old designs. There are things that are they're not putting generally 5 nanometer scale chips into cars. I think it's more like 14 nanometers, which they may be able to do. I'm not sure. I'm just talking off the top of my head here and kind of going where my thoughts take me. But that's but I'm sure they used to have some a chip fab or two lying around. At least that was my impression, because they were able to domestically produce computers of a certain older computers. I think that was discussed when they were talking about we're going to drop Windows entirely and have our own computers. We're not gonna. Okay, Intel says we can't use their stuff. We can't get their stuff anymore. We'll make our own. And there's a whole review of what they were actually capable of doing, what they had the technology to do, and it was they were a good at least 20 years behind at that point. But that's still functional for most most needs. Are not going to be doing high-end gaming or AI related stuff, or things like that. So I'm not sure that they're in quite the dire situation that people think that they are, just because they've always kind of been more reliant on older technology. On the other hand, they brought back the I think Artur Rehi called them the loaf van. uh, because they because it's literally 1970s era technology. They restarted the production lines on them. No microchips in them at all. No computers at all. Pure mechanicals. Apparently they beat you all to hell as you're riding in them because in the 1970s era technology from transportation from Soviet Union was not very comfortable. But they were able to do that. They do that instead of they have a very small throughput for actual modern combat vehicles. They have a very small throughput for pretty much anything because they don't have a lot of people. They've spent they've spent centuries killing their own people, causing their own population crashes over and over and over again. And sometimes the same group over and over again. I think this is like the third or fourth time that there's been genocide against Ukrainians from Russia. It's just crazy. And since the Cossacks were taken over by Russia. I think that's in the deal with that they had with Poland or something. Anyway, ever since Russia took them over, they simultaneously, the Cossacks and the Ukrainians have been the subject of several genocides, and have been like the biggest innovators and most productive people in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And that's where the Soviet military, where much of them were constructed post World War II. There's the Ukrainians who really held the field at the Battle of Kursk, and Kursk is ethnically Ukrainian, or at least it was. The Ukrainians don't claim any of that because they're focused on restoring the 1991 borders. But when the armed forces of Ukraine crossed the border into Kursk, they were kind of surprised to meet a bunch of people who spoke Ukrainian, that they didn't realize, hey, there were still a bunch of people over there who do speak Ukrainian. Because Ukrainian got to be a very small population of people who actually spoke Ukrainian fluently in Ukraine itself due to Soviet policies regarding language. And it's amazing how resilient. It's amazing how resilient they are. And Russia doesn't have that. Putin's trying to force people to work in military factories. You can be mobilized into the military. You can be mobilized into the military industrial complex there. And it seemed I have to rely on translations, and a lot of times you just get like bits and pieces presented of a full speech or something. But I do remember he was in the past several weeks he's talked about mobilizing people into military factories. This is I think he said he used the term necessary, but everybody understood that necessary for the war. And that's just take people who don't know what the heck they're doing, throw them onto a production line, and you're going to get a lot of screw-ups. You're going to get a lot of a lot of defects. You're not going to get good stuff, especially if they're trying to do something that's kind of sort of modernish. That requires a lot of precision and skill, especially if you have limited automation to aid you. And I don't think they don't have the ability to do their own tooling on things with tight tolerances. They don't have all these CNC makers scattered around like the U.S. does, because that's never really been their thing. They've relied on buying those kinds of things from the West in order to set up their factories and their refineries and stuff. They just don't have the capacity to spin all this stuff up. It takes time. It takes a lot of time to build up expertise and proficiency so that you can have new production lines that are operating according to military specs. It's in the 1940s anymore. It's definitely not the 1800s, which is where Russia's getting their military tactics from. And I look at them like, where are they going to how are they going to get 10 times as many drones in 2025 as they did in 2024? They're not going to. They're not going to, because they can't, because they don't have the people, they don't have the skills, they don't have the facilities, they don't have the equipment to do it. They don't have the raw materials, I'm pretty sure. I mean, yeah, it needs a lot of plastic. We got a lot of oil, so I guess you can consider that a raw material. I got iron ore, I guess you can consider that a raw material for other stuff. I'm sure they have sand sitting around that you could technically call raw material for, the chips that go into drones. Not going to change anything. You can't just wave your hands and say, Alakazam, I have now hard plastics from oil, and I have structural steel, and I have, computer chips. It doesn't work like that. And it's just crazy. The thought that they could just overnight produce. Russian society is not flexible. They're not adaptive. By design, they're not adaptive. By design, they're not flexible. By design, they're not innovative. Ukraine, far more adaptable, far more flexible. Just by virtue of how they're raised and the values that they have and how they're taught and all this stuff, they're not Russians. They're not steeped in that culture. They try to get along. They've tried to do what they could to survive over the decades. There's a rift, and that rift was the Mongols, and they reduced the second biggest city in Europe down to like a handful of families, and everyone who resisted treated the same way. Ones that gave in became the Russians. The ones who didn't oppose the people of Yaroslav and the people of Moscow, and those nobles were like, oh, yep, we saw what you did down there. Don't want any of that. And And as the Ukrainian steppes slowly repopulated, and they formed like military bands in order to fight off people who would prey on the villages and stuff. They became their own thing. They became their own thing with their own set of values, their own set of their own sense of identity. And that identity wasn't as a Ukrainian. Obviously, it was a member of this group or that group. And today, they were all today we refer to them as Cossacks. I really don't know if that's how they term themselves. Probably not. But certainly free people, independent people, even when they were supposed to be subjugated by this group or by Poland or Lithuania or Russia, they still kept their own unique identity and their own way of doing things. And just like in the modern day, they were just whoever was it was the great powers of Europe that basically decided who was going to be in charge of them, who they were going to answer to. They never had a say in it themselves, really. They fought back, and honestly, I think they built fortresses specifically just to redirect invaders to, so they'd leave the rest of the population alive. Just yep, that's where the resistance is, right there. That big fortress up there. Go knock it down. So this isn't new. What's happening there isn't new. It's been rehashed time and time again. But just because it's not new doesn't mean that it should be happening. It's horrible that it's happening again. And it is inexcusable. It is inexcusable that they are not getting more help. Currently, they're using our tools that were designed in the 70s and 80s for the most part in order, in the way they were intended, for the purpose they were intended, which is, destroying Soviet machines. But we give them stuff with conditions that we never accept, conditions that we say, if somebody gave us these toys and we said, oh yeah, and this guy over here is attacking us and is has a stated goal of wiping us all out, of wiping out our culture and stuff, and we're gonna say screw you, whoever gave us these weapons. We're gonna use them the way that we see fit. One thing that I do like is that they've I'm going to be talking about their top general tomorrow. I think he's an interesting guy, and the things that he's doing are very interesting, especially considering his roots in military training. And I think it's worth looking at him as a rather high-profile person who certainly has a lot of name recognition. If you follow the war, you know who he is. And he's just really, I think that he's going to be considered kind of the military genius of this war. I like Zelensky. By all accounts, a great guy. Cares very deeply for the people under his command and the people in Ukraine. Not a very good judge of things, and honestly, his attitudes might be kind of coloring the U.S.'s responses to things now, which would be a shame. Anyway, more on that tomorrow. It's not going to be all happy, good stuff about Ukraine. There's going to be some, there's room for criticism there. But I have to say, they're carrying the fight, right? They're carrying the fight to Russia itself. This was supposed to be over. I mean, even those of us sitting at home here in the U.S., we were right there with Putin. This is going to be a 3-day operation. They're just going to go and they're going to decapitate the government and reinstall, what's his name, the old guy that they booted out, and Ukraine would return to being a puppet of Russia. And instead, 2.5 years later, decades of Russian and Soviet production destroyed, huge numbers of Russian soldiers wounded or killed. The Russian economy absolutely shattered. I mean, nobody would have seen this. It all started with, one guy who, by all accounts, didn't even believe that this was coming, who, rather than going, oh my God, I didn't see this coming, decided to fight. They had the right guy there at the right time. And there were a lot of others who would have just up and left. He could have left. They had a plane right there, or a helicopter or something, and I doubt that Russia was gonna interfere with that, because all they wanted him gone, and they wanted their puppet installed so they could go back to owning Ukraine. And Ukraine said hell no, and they have been giving them, doesn't matter. I mean, the toys that they have definitely matter, but they don't matter if the people who are using them don't have if they don't have the heart to use them properly. At the end of the day, all the best tools are useless if you don't care about using them. And they certainly are. And that's why I don't worry about, the fields being taken every day, a couple fields here and there, even little communities. Those communities have already been targeted and flattened by Russia. If anybody's living there, well, I really doubt anybody's living in these villages that are being taken. They're that's just the nature of the conflict. That's how Russia fights. Burn it all down around them. Lay waste to the land. Apparently they miss that supplies are trucked in. But leave nothing standing. And so it's grim, but in my view, the front-line places, they're already lost. Already lost to Ukraine. It's just a matter of how much how steep of a price can they make Russia pay for it. And it's been steep. It's been steep enough that I don't see a way for Russia to win this. I don't see a way for Russia to prevent Ukraine from, in the end, from retaking everything that Russia took, and probably more than that, because I'm sure they're going to establish a 25 or 30 kilometer deep zone on the Russian side as a buffer. Next time, you go through your land instead of ours. Next time, your artillery isn't going to be in range of our major cities. You know, that's just how it's going to be. It's how it has to be. It's the only way to really have peace. And very, very possibly that'll all be moot because I don't think Putin's regime is going to last. I don't think they're going to survive. I think they're going to do exactly what Medvedev said in 2022, and they're going to fight. They're going to pour everything they have. They are going to waste the strength of the state until it falls apart, and let the world deal with the warlords left over. I honestly think that that's the plan at this point, because I don't see any other reason for them to continue it. So if they've made that choice, and if they can't win, nobody's gonna have any spoils. Yeah, that's their choice. They chose to go down this road, and the Russians continue to follow their leader. And it's sad. I think that there will be future generations of Russians who will learn how not to do this. You know, it's not out of a desire for people to suffer or anything, but the people who are left are going to have to learn how to do stuff differently. You're going to have to learn how to think for themselves. You're going to have to learn how to cope with a world that is a lot bigger than they had imagined, a lot more diverse than they were comfortable with. You know, and that'll be a rough transition, but not nearly as rough as what they're getting now. That's all I have for you today. It's 38 minutes. Oh, God damn, I've been rambling for 38 minutes. This is what happens when I'm tired, okay? I just ramble. You have a great day. You have a great rest of your week. I know you're probably not watching this now. If you watch this, it'll be like in a month or two. Yeah, have a great time. Have a great day whenever you're watching. And remember, take care of yourself and take care of others.